So let's tackle first this idea of greedflation. Federal NDP leader Jagmeet Singh says that corporate greed is the reason that groceries are so expensive in Canada. But on its face, this is really questionable because where was corporate greed before the pandemic? Why is corporate greed only an issue now? Did COVID-19 cause certain corporate executives to become more greedy or care about profits more than before the pandemic? So in 2019, they weren't greedy, and now in 2022, they're extra greedy. It just doesn't make sense. What's really happening here is that NDP leader Jagmeet Singh is trying to score some cheap political points because already Canadians have lost some trust in grocers after there was allegedly some collusion going on. So Canadians' trust in grocers is already somewhat compromised. Now, while it's true that grocers in Canada have enjoyed record profits during the pandemic, record profits are not proof of profiteering. Here's why. The NDP is only looking at the dollar amount of profits that these grocers have earned. But a more fair metric to determine if they were profiteering would be to look at their profit margins. If their profit margins had increased greatly during the pandemic, then you could rightfully make an argument that yes, they're profiteering. But a report from Dalhousie University's Agri-Food Analytics Lab produced a report analyzing the claim that greedflation is driving the cost of groceries in Canada, and it concluded the following. Indeed, revenues have increased dramatically, but so have the costs of goods sold. Since the start of the pandemic, while revenues did go up, gross margins have remained relatively consistent throughout. If quote-unquote greedflation exists, the available data suggests grocers are not responsible. So essentially what's happening here is that for grocers, the cost of the products that they're buying are increasing. So even though they're maintaining pretty consistent profit margins, their total profit dollars have increased. So critics might now argue that, okay, well, if your profit dollars are so high, then why don't you decrease your profit margin? But what they might not understand is that grocery retailers actually face some of the lowest margins of any retail sector in the country. Loblaws, for example, which is one of the largest grocery chains in the country, their profit margin was actually just 3.6% last year, which is razor thin. That's why you see in the grocery sector, it really is a volume play. If you're only making 3.6%, that's not a lot of margin for error. And actually, conveniently, Jagmeet Singh avoids the fact that Loblaws owns Shoppers Drug Mart. And the CFO, the chief financial officer at Loblaws, clearly stated that part of the reason why their profits increased during the pandemic was that at Shoppers Drug Mart, in their drug retail section, they had much higher margins on services like vaccine delivery for the COVID-19 vaccine, as well as COVID-19 testing. And I haven't heard the NDP leader complain that they administered either of those services during the pandemic. And presumably, it was the federal government that negotiated those rates with private drug retailers, so the finger points back at the government on that one. So if gross margins on food retail remained pretty well stable throughout the pandemic, it's really difficult to make the case that grocers were gouging consumers. If anything, the question should be, why did their costs go up? Why is food becoming more expensive for them to buy? And in that case, the fingers point back at the government, but again, we'll get to that later.